Ladies and gentlemen, in life there are moments when the right thing to do is not to speak, but to stay silent. Silence is not an absence, it's a tool, a skill, and often the wisest choice. Anger is one of the most intense emotions we can experience. It rises within us like a storm, quick and fierce, sometimes catching us off guard. In those moments, we feel an urgent need to act, to lash out, to make our voice heard, to make others understand the depth of our frustration. But here's the thing, we all must learn anger, like a storm, will eventually pass. The question is, how will we act in the middle of it? Will we allow ourselves to be swept away by the chaos, or will we find the strength to remain calm? It's easy to let our anger control us, to speak words that we later regret. Anger clouds our judgment and twists our perspective, making it nearly impossible to think clearly. But when we speak in anger, we often do more harm than good. Our words become like daggers, sharp and cutting, and once they are thrown, they can't be taken back. The damage can linger for a lifetime. We may lose relationships, opportunities, and even our own peace of mind. That's why silence in moments of anger is not just a choice, it's a necessary act of self-preservation. The real power of silence comes from the space it creates. When we choose to be silent, we give ourselves the gift of time. We allow ourselves the opportunity to step back, to breathe, and to reflect. In that silence, the storm within us begins to calm. The heat of our anger starts to dissipate, and we can see the situation more clearly. We can think about the long-term consequences of our actions and whether the words we want to say are truly worth it. Silence doesn't mean we're weak or afraid to speak up. On the contrary, silence in moments of anger is a sign of great strength. It takes real courage to hold back, to choose not to react in the heat of the moment, and to trust that there will be a better time to address the situation. Silence gives us the opportunity to regain control over our emotions, to avoid saying things we will regret, and to make a more thoughtful, measured response when the time is right. When we stay silent in the face of anger, we give ourselves a chance to act with wisdom. We stop ourselves from doing or saying things we might later regret. We prevent ourselves from adding fuel to the fire of a conflict that could otherwise escalate out of control. Instead, we can choose to respond with a clear mind, with calmness, and with the understanding that some battles are better fought with patience, not with words. And let me remind you, anger is a temporary emotion. The storm will pass. It always does. But the impact of your words can last far longer than the moment of rage. So the next time you find yourself gripped by anger, remember that silence is your most powerful ally. Stay silent, take a step back, let the storm pass. And in that silence, you will find clarity, control, and the strength to respond with wisdom rather than regret. There are moments in life when the pain we feel is so deep, so overwhelming that words simply fail us. We try to speak, we try to explain the hurt, but nothing seems adequate. The pain sits there, heavy and unrelenting, and in those moments it feels as though we are losing control. It's a struggle to keep our composure, to maintain our dignity, and to face the world as though we haven't been shattered inside. It's during these times that we must remember the power of silence and how it can be our greatest ally. When we are deeply wounded, whether emotionally or physically, the urge to lash out is strong. We want others to understand the depth of our suffering. We want them to see our pain and validate it, but often what we fail to realize is that in speaking out of that pain, we only bring more suffering into the world. Words spoken in hurt can burn bridges, create misunderstandings, and leave scars that last much longer than the pain we initially felt. In the heat of emotional turmoil, our words can become as damaging as the hurt itself. That's when silence becomes a source of strength. Silence in the face of pain isn't weakness, it's a powerful response. It's a message to yourself and to the world that you are stronger than the pain that threatens to break you. Silence allows us to process the hurt without letting it define us, to heal without needing the validation of others. When we are hurt, it's natural to seek attention, sympathy, or even revenge, but none of these things will bring true healing. Only silence can create the space we need to rise above the pain and move forward with grace. When we choose silence in our moments of suffering, we take back control. It says, I refuse to let this pain destroy me. I will not let it control my actions or my words. In that silence, we preserve our dignity. We protect ourselves from making decisions we might regret and from allowing the pain to dictate our future. Silence gives us the space to breathe, to reflect, and to choose how we will respond, not from a place of hurt, but from a place of strength. It's in that silence that we find our power. We don't need to prove to anyone how much we've been hurt. The more we speak in pain, the more we give our power away. But when we choose silence, we take ownership of our emotions. We regain control of the narrative. We remind ourselves that while we can't always control the pain we experience, we can control how we respond to it. Silence becomes an act of reclaiming our power and allowing ourselves to heal in peace. So when you're hurt, whether by words, actions, or circumstances, remember that silence is often the most powerful response. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a declaration of strength. In those moments when everything within you wants to speak, to lash out, or to seek revenge, choose silence. Allow yourself the time and space to heal. When you do, you'll find that the pain loses its grip on you, and you emerge from it stronger, wiser, and more in control of your own story. In our fast-paced world, we often find ourselves eager to speak, to share our opinions, our ideas, and our thoughts. There's a temptation to always be talking, to always have something to say. But here's the reality: one of the most powerful things you can do is listen. The truth is, people will rarely remember the words you speak, but they will always remember how you made them feel. We often forget this simple yet profound fact. In our rush to be heard, we miss out on one of the most valuable opportunities we have the chance to learn. When someone else is speaking, we tend to focus on how we can respond. We think about our next point, our next idea, or how we can steer the conversation in a direction that suits us. But real communication isn't about waiting for your turn to speak. It's about understanding, connecting, and truly hearing the other person. It's easy to talk, but it takes wisdom and discipline to listen. When you choose to be silent while someone else is speaking, you are choosing to engage in a deeper level of communication. The key to great listening isn't just hearing the words that are being said, it's also about noticing what's not being said. People often speak in layers, with emotions, experiences, and unspoken truths hiding between their words. By staying silent and fully present, you allow yourself the opportunity to hear the unsaid, to read between the lines, and to understand the deeper meaning behind their words. This is where true wisdom lies, not in the surface level exchange, but in the silence that gives you the space to reflect, to process, and to absorb what's being shared. When you practice silence and truly listen to others, you create a powerful connection. People will feel heard, valued, and respected, and that is something far more lasting than any clever response or quick retort. They will remember how you made them feel, and that will leave a lasting impression. Listening builds trust. It shows that you care more about understanding them than about proving your point. And when you listen, you also learn. You learn about their experiences, their perspectives, their struggles, and their dreams. You gain insights that can only come from taking the time to truly hear another person. In this process, you become a better communicator, not because you talk more, but because you understand others more deeply. In every conversation, there is an opportunity to grow. But that growth doesn't come from speaking, it comes from listening. When you listen with intention, with an open heart and mind, you learn not just facts, but the stories and emotions that shape the person in front of you. And through this understanding, you can build stronger relationships, foster greater empathy, and navigate the world with greater wisdom. So the next time you find yourself in a conversation, resist the urge to fill every silence with your own voice. Instead, embrace that silence as a chance to truly listen. Let the other person's words sink in, and pay attention not only to what is being said, but to what is being left unsaid. In that silence, you will gain not only wisdom, but the opportunity to connect with others on a deeper, more meaningful level. We all do it, whether we admit it or not. We form opinions about others, sometimes in the blink of an eye. We look at someone, hear a few words, or witness a single action, and before we know it, we've made up our minds about who they are or what they're about. It happens quickly, almost instinctively. But here's the truth: when we judge others in haste, we are almost always doing so with only a piece of the puzzle. We base our decisions on a limited understanding, a narrow view, and we ignore the complexity of what might really be going on. We see the surface and assume we know everything. The problem is, we almost never know the full story. And when we act on these incomplete judgments, we hurt ourselves and those we judge. This is where the power of silence comes into play. When we find ourselves ready to judge, silence becomes the most valuable tool we have. It doesn't mean we don't have thoughts or feelings. It simply means we take a step back before we speak or act. Silence is not a sign of weakness, it's an opportunity to reconsider. By holding our tongue, we give ourselves space to reflect, to question our assumptions, and to ask, do I really know the whole story? In those precious moments of pause, we can challenge ourselves to dig deeper and acknowledge that our perspective might be limited. The problem with judging others is that it locks us into a narrow, one-dimensional view of them. We don't know what they've been through, what burdens they carry, or what struggles they face. Maybe they're going through something we can't see or understand. We might not know their history, their pain, or the challenges they've had to overcome to get to where they are. And yet we form opinions based on a tiny fraction of what we perceive. When we choose to judge, we close ourselves off from the fuller picture, from the complexity that makes them who they are. Silence, on the other hand, allows us to step back and see the bigger picture. When we stay quiet in the face of judgment, we stop and ask ourselves, what might I be missing? We allow ourselves the chance to reconsider our opinions and recognize that there is much more to a person than what meets the eye. When we take the time to be silent and reflect, we make room for understanding, and that understanding opens up the possibility of compassion. And compassion is where true wisdom lies. When we choose silence, we show compassion not only to others, but to ourselves as well. We understand that we too are flawed and imperfect. We realize that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools they've been given, just as we are. Compassion doesn't mean condoning behavior we don't agree with. It means recognizing that we are all human, and we all have our battles. By staying silent, we give others the space to grow, to learn, and to change without the pressure of our judgments. It's a gift we give them, and it's a gift we give ourselves. Choosing silence in the face of judgment isn't always easy. It requires discipline. It means resisting the urge to speak out, to prove we're right, or to make someone else wrong. But in doing so, we become wiser. We become kinder. We grow as individuals, expanding our ability to empathize, to understand, and to connect. The next time you find yourself ready to judge, take a moment, take a deep breath, and choose silence. In that silence, you'll gain the clarity you need to understand, to show compassion, and to grow in ways you never thought possible. And in the end, you'll find that the more you withhold judgment, the more you open yourself up to the beauty of human connection. Have you ever spoken up before you had all the facts? It's something we've all done at some point. In the heat of the moment, we feel the pressure to respond, to share our thoughts, to jump into the conversation and offer our opinion. It feels natural, almost automatic. But here's the problem: when we speak before we have all the information, we often make decisions based on assumptions rather than facts. And assumptions, as we all know, are rarely accurate. The truth is, acting or speaking without the full picture can lead us down a path that we later regret. This is where the power of silence comes in. Silence in these moments isn't just a lack of words, it's a powerful choice. It's a decision to pause and gather the facts, to listen carefully, and to understand the situation fully before we take action. Think of silence as a guardrail, preventing us from rushing to conclusions, from jumping to the wrong idea. It's easy to get caught up in the urgency of a situation and feel like we need to have an answer right now. But what we don't realize is that acting on incomplete information often leads to mistakes. Silence provides the space we need to step back, to pause, and to avoid making decisions that are based on partial knowledge. When we don't have all the facts, silence isn't just a passive option, it's the most intelligent thing we can do. It gives us time to gather more information, to ask the right questions, and to understand the nuances of the situation. It gives us the opportunity to assess the situation from different angles, to listen to all sides, and to avoid rushing to judgment. When we stay silent, we empower ourselves to act with wisdom and clarity rather than reacting impulsively. Silence also helps us avoid the trap of making decisions based on emotions. In the absence of complete information, our feelings can often cloud our judgment. We might jump to conclusions out of frustration, fear, or excitement, only to find later that our emotions misled us. By choosing silence, we create the distance we need to clear our minds, to separate our feelings from the facts, and to ensure that our decisions are based on reality, not on how we feel in the moment. There is great power in taking the time to gather knowledge before we speak or act. The most successful people, the ones who make the best decisions, are those who know when to be quiet, when to observe, and when to listen. They understand that not having all the facts isn't a weakness, but an opportunity to be more thoughtful and deliberate. In these moments, silence allows them to make decisions that are grounded in truth, not assumptions. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you don't have all the facts, resist the urge to speak or act immediately. Take a step back, breathe, and embrace the silence. Use it as an opportunity to gather more information, to reflect, and to make decisions that are based on truth, not on incomplete knowledge. When we learn to be silent in these moments, we not only avoid mistakes, we also become wiser, more thoughtful, and more intentional in everything we do. Envy. It's a feeling that we all experience at some point in our lives. It creeps in quietly, often without us even realizing it. And suddenly we find ourselves looking at someone else's success, their achievements, or their possessions with a sense of longing and inadequacy. It's a dangerous emotion, one that can spiral into bitterness and resentment if we're not careful. But here's the thing, when envy rises within us, the worst thing we can do is speak about it. It's tempting to voice our feelings, to express our frustration, to make comparisons that only fuel the fire. But in those moments, silence can be our greatest ally. Instead of speaking in the heat of envy, we must learn to stay silent. Silence is not a sign of weakness, it's an opportunity for reflection. When we choose to be quiet, we create the space to understand why we're feeling this way. We can ask ourselves, why does someone else's success trigger these feelings within me? Is it because we believe we're not good enough? Is it because we're measuring our worth against someone else's accomplishments? Silence allows us to step back from the emotional rush of envy and examine what's really going on inside. Envy is often rooted in a sense of lack. We see what others have and we believe that their success somehow diminishes our own potential. But the truth is, someone else's success has no bearing on your ability to succeed. Their achievements are theirs and yours are yours. When we compare ourselves to others, we lose sight of our own path, our own journey. Envy makes us forget that we are capable of creating our own success on our own terms. Silence gives us the time to remember this, to shift our focus away from the achievements of others and back to our own growth. In that silence, we can also begin to transform envy into something far more powerful: motivation. Instead of letting envy drag us down, instead of letting it fester into resentment, we can choose to let it drive us forward. When we feel envious, we are being given a signal, a reminder of what we desire, of what we want to achieve. But instead of letting that desire turn into jealousy or anger, we can use it as fuel to propel ourselves toward our own goals. Silence allows us to take that raw emotion and turn it into something positive, something that inspires us to take action and strive for our own success. The key to overcoming envy is understanding that someone else's success does not take anything away from you. Their achievements are not a reflection of your failures. In fact, when we stay silent in the face of envy, we make a conscious decision to elevate ourselves through growth, rather than tearing others down. The most successful people are not those who are consumed by envy, but those who use it as a catalyst for self-improvement. They see someone else's success as proof that what they want is possible, not as a sign that they'll never get there. So the next time you feel the pang of envy rising within you, take a step back. Choose silence. Use that silence to reflect, to learn, and to transform envy into motivation. Remember that your success is not diminished by the success of others. When you rise above envy, when you turn it into a force for growth, you elevate yourself and your potential. And in doing so, you free yourself from the chains of comparison and make space for your own achievements to flourish. It's easy to criticize, isn't it? In fact, it's almost natural for us to find faults in others. We see something we don't agree with, something we think could be done better, and immediately the urge to criticize rises within us. Criticism feels good in the moment. It makes us feel like we're in control, like we have the answers, like we know better. But here's the truth: criticism rarely leads to positive change. In fact, more often than not, it does more harm than good. When you feel the urge to criticize, take a moment and ask yourself, is this the best way to help someone? Is this going to contribute to their growth, or will it only make them feel small? If the answer isn't clear, then silence may be the most powerful choice you can make. When we criticize without offering anything constructive, we end up tearing down rather than building up. Words once spoken cannot be taken back. And harsh criticism, even if it's meant with good intentions, has a lasting impact. It makes others defensive, closed off, and sometimes it damages their confidence. When we criticize, we momentarily place ourselves on a pedestal, but it's a pedestal that is built on negativity, not on truth. And while it might feel satisfying in the moment, it doesn't create any lasting change. Instead, when you want to criticize, pause and embrace silence. Silence doesn't mean silence forever, but it means taking a step back long enough to reconsider your words. When you stay silent, you give the other person the chance to reflect on their actions without the burden of your judgment hanging over them. It's in silence that you give them the opportunity to learn from their mistakes, to grow, and to figure things out on their own. You allow them the space to correct their course without making them feel like they've already failed. And here's the beautiful part in that silence. You also maintain your integrity. You preserve your own dignity by not stooping to a place of judgment. You create an environment of encouragement instead of discouragement. Instead of building walls with your words, you create bridges, allowing room for growth, understanding, and improvement. In a world that is quick to criticize, silence is an act of leadership. It's the decision to be a guiding light rather than an obstacle. Now, silence doesn't mean we should never offer feedback or advice. Constructive criticism, when done thoughtfully, can be one of the most powerful tools for growth. But this type of feedback isn't born out of frustration or superiority, it's born out of empathy and care. Silence, in this case, gives you the space to think before you speak, to craft your words with intention, and to offer something that helps rather than hurts. So the next time you feel the urge to criticize, take a moment to pause. Ask yourself if your words will encourage or discourage. Will they build someone up or tear them down? And if you find that what you have to say is not constructive, choose silence. In that silence, you create room for reflection, for growth, and for a deeper connection. You become a source of support, a catalyst for change, and a beacon of encouragement in someone's life. And that, my friends, is far more powerful than any criticism you could offer. Conflict is something we all face at some point in our lives. It's inevitable. Whether it's with a loved one, a colleague, or even with ourselves, disagreements and misunderstandings will happen. When we're caught in the middle of a conflict, emotions run high. Words come quickly. And they often feel like weapons, ready to lash out in defense or frustration. But let me tell you this, in the midst of conflict, silence can be the most powerful tool you have. It can be the bridge that leads to resolution. We've all been there. Someone says something that triggers us. And before we know it, we're caught in the heat of the moment, firing back with our own words, escalating the situation. It's a cycle that can quickly get out of control. But what happens when one person chooses to stay silent? It's almost like an act of courage. Silence in conflict is not about giving up or conceding, it's about creating the space for something greater. It's about stopping the escalation and allowing room for understanding. When you remain silent, you break the cycle of tension and open the door for the conflict to be viewed with clarity. You see silence as a form of strength. It's not weakness. When we are in conflict, it can be easy to let our emotions rule us and to respond impulsively. But silence gives us the chance to step back, to breathe, and to regain control over our own reactions. It allows us to think before we speak, to choose our words carefully, and to avoid saying something in the heat of the moment that we'll later regret. Imagine you're in a heated argument, and instead of continuing to engage in the back and forth, you take a step back and choose silence. That silence disarms the other person. It creates a pause, a moment where the tension that's been building can be broken. In that pause, the other person is left with space to reconsider their words, to reflect on the situation, and to see the conflict from a different perspective. That moment of silence creates room for empathy and understanding, and in that moment it becomes possible for reconciliation to take place. The truth is, the conflict may not end immediately. But by choosing silence, you shift the dynamics. You give both parties the opportunity to cool off, to reflect, and to approach the situation with a clearer mind. Sometimes silence is the best way to show that you are not interested in escalating the conflict, that you are more focused on finding a solution than winning the argument. When we engage in conflict, our natural instinct is often to protect ourselves, to defend our position, and to prove we are right. But what if we paused and allowed ourselves to truly listen, to understand the other person's point of view? What if we could stop trying to win the argument and instead focus on resolving the issue? Silence helps us do that. It gives us the space to reflect, to reconsider our approach, and to act from a place of wisdom and emotional maturity. So the next time you find yourself in a conflict, remember that silence is not a sign of defeat, it's a sign of strength, of self-control, and of the willingness to resolve the issue with understanding and grace. In the silence, you create the opportunity for reconciliation, for peace, and for the growth that can only come from navigating conflict with integrity. And in that moment, you become the one who has the power to change the course of the conversation and ultimately the course of the relationship. Insecurity is something we all face. It's a universal experience. There are moments in life when we feel unsure, when we question our worth, when doubts creep in and make us feel small. In those moments, it's easy to try and overcompensate. We find ourselves speaking more, justifying our actions, explaining away our doubts, hoping that if we say the right words, others will see us differently. But what if instead of talking to cover up our insecurities, we chose silence? What if we saw silence not as weakness, but as a sign of strength? In moments of insecurity, silence can become the most empowering choice we can make. It may feel uncomfortable at first, especially when we want to fill the space with explanations and justifications. But silence speaks volumes. It says, I don't need to prove myself to anyone. I don't need to seek validation from the outside world because I am already enough. In those moments, silence becomes the foundation upon which we build our confidence. It becomes the space in which we connect with our own strength, our own worth, and our own truth. You see, when we are insecure, the instinct is often to make noise, to talk louder, to fill the silence with explanations and reasons why we are worthy. But the reality is, no amount of words can convince others or ourselves of our value. It's not in what we say, but in how we hold ourselves and how we show up that our worth is truly demonstrated. Silence allows us to stop chasing approval and start accepting ourselves just as we are. In silence, we begin to realize that our value does not depend on the opinions of others. It doesn't depend on being constantly heard, constantly validated, or constantly seeking the approval of those around us. Our value is inherent, and silence is the space where we can reconnect with that truth. When we choose silence in moments of insecurity, we stop looking outward for reassurance and we start looking inward. We allow ourselves to breathe, to center ourselves, and to understand that we don't need to defend or explain who we are. Silence doesn't mean we are weak or unsure. It means we are confident enough to stand still in the face of uncertainty, knowing that the answers we seek are within us. It means we are strong enough to accept ourselves without needing anyone else to validate us. In those moments of doubt, silence gives us the time to gather our thoughts, to process our feelings, and to build the inner strength we need to move forward. Silence allows us to stand tall and to reclaim our power from within, instead of giving it away by seeking validation from the outside world. It's in the stillness and the quiet moments that we come to realize we are enough just as we are. So the next time you find yourself feeling insecure, remember this: you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to explain your worth or justify your actions. In the face of insecurity, silence is not weakness, it is your strength. It is the space where your true confidence is born, where your inner peace is cultivated, and where you realize that you are already whole. Stand tall in your silence, and let it be a reminder that your worth is not defined by the approval of others, but by the quiet strength that comes from within. There are times in life when words simply fail us. We find ourselves in situations where we don't know what to say, or we fear that anything we say might only make things worse. Whether it's in moments of grief during a conflict or when we see someone in pain, the instinct is to speak, to offer comfort, to fill the silence with our words. But sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is not speak at all. Silence in these moments is not an absence of care. It is not neglect or indifference. Silence, in fact, can be a profound offering of respect. It says more than words ever could. When we choose silence in those moments of uncertainty, we are acknowledging the gravity of the situation. We are honoring the fact that sometimes there is no perfect thing to say, and that's okay. In our world, we often feel the pressure to have all the answers, to be the one who can fix everything with our words. But the reality is, some situations are bigger than us, and sometimes our words are not the solution. In those moments, silence becomes our way of saying, I may not have the answers, but I am here. I am present. I am present. I am standing with you, and that, in itself, can be more comforting than any words we might offer. Think about it. How often have we found ourselves trying to fill the silence with well-meaning words, only to realize later that perhaps the person we were trying to comfort didn't need our advice or our solutions, they just needed someone to be there. They needed someone to listen, someone to acknowledge their pain, someone to share their space in that moment. Sometimes your presence speaks louder than any words you could say. In the silence, we create a space for others to process their emotions, for them to feel understood, and for them to know that they are not alone. Silence offers a moment of reflection, a time to gather our thoughts, and a way to be fully present with the person in front of us. It allows us to connect on a deeper level, without the distraction of unnecessary words. And that connection, authentic, present, and empathetic, is what truly helps to heal. We don't need to have all the answers. We don't need to solve every problem with a clever phrase or a perfect piece of advice. Life is not about having the right words all the time. Sometimes it's about being willing to sit in the discomfort, to stand in the face of uncertainty, and to offer the gift of our undivided attention and compassion. In those moments, silence becomes a powerful expression of care, an acknowledgement that we understand the weight of the situation, and that we are willing to walk through it with the other person. So the next time you find yourself unsure of what to say, don't be afraid of the silence. Embrace it. Let it be a powerful tool for connection, for empathy, and for support. Because sometimes the most profound thing you can say is nothing at all. In that silence, you show that you are present, that you care, and that you are ready to stand with them in whatever they are facing. In the end, your silence might just be the most comforting thing you can offer. Learning to stay silent is not about withdrawing or being passive. It is about being discerning. It's about knowing when your words are valuable and when they might only add to the noise. Silence is the companion of wisdom, the mark of emotional strength, and the secret to deeper understanding. It's a choice, one that will guide you toward better relationships, greater success, and a more peaceful, fulfilling life. So, my friends, learn to stay silent when it matters. Let your silence speak louder than your words ever could.